people say, oh, Donald Trump is out to wreck NATO, but actually Donald Trump and everyone in America, Joe Biden included, have a point when they say that Europe has, as a whole, not done enough on its own account in the defence sphere and has been too willing to just assume that Uncle Sam will bail us out if there's trouble. But we can see in Ukraine that the threat is becoming increasingly close and real, and we need to do something about it urgently.
So let's talk about the top story in today's Sunday Times, which has revealed Britain's vulnerability to ballistic missile attacks. Whilst Russia's long-range missile attacks on Ukraine have resulted in other European countries scrambling to boost their air defences, the UK has no land-based air defence to protect critical infrastructure or population centres from ballistic missiles. It adds to the pressure on the government to increase its spending on defence. Now, Donald Trump is expected to use the next NATO summit in June to demand that members spend 5% of their GDP on defence. The UK at the moment spends less than half of that. And whilst Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to hit 2.5%, no timeline for that has been set. The former Labour leader, Lord Kinnock, told Times Radio earlier that the country should be spending more than 2.5% of its GDP on defence.
Our security is in peril. And whilst the focus in the last 30-odd, 40 years has naturally been against domestic terrorism, or indeed foreign terrorism, the exterior threat now comes from the efforts at strategic disruption by the Kremlin.
This all comes as we hear the news this afternoon that Ukraine has launched a fresh offensive in Russia's Kursk region. Ukraine seized a chunk of territory in Kursk in August last year, but had been pushed back in recent months. Let's chat now to Sir Nick Harvey, who is Liberal Democrat Armed Forces Minister in the coalition government. Good afternoon, Sir Nick.
Hello, good afternoon.
First of all, should we be worried about our vulnerability to ballistic missiles? I guess in the past we've just thought, well, we're unlikely to get attacked, so we're not going to invest in this. Has the threat level been ratcheted up in your view?
I think the threat has rather changed over time. If you go back 20 years, we had quite an appetite for joining in international efforts of acting as a global policeman. I'm thinking of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and so on. In the course of all that, we've made a lot of enemies. And these were people we didn't think, frankly, had the capacity to strike at us with something as complex as a ballistic missile. But as time had gone on, more and more of them are able to do that. We've seen North Korea experimenting with ballistic missiles and getting more and more range out of their rockets. We've seen Iran really developing in this space and supplying them to others. For example, the Houthis in Yemen, and we are now facing a threat from people that perhaps in the past we were inclined to view as little more than terrorists or tribesmen, but they are increasingly sophisticated. And in the meantime, I'm afraid our defences just have not kept up with this.
Yeah, I mean, when you read into it, particularly the idea that we don't have any way of defending our nuclear power stations, we don't have any missile defences over our population centres, it does make you feel exposed. But I mean, I guess you've got to assess the risk. And at the moment, presumably the feeling is that the risk just isn't there, even though it is escalating. Is this saber rattling by various vested interests, or do you think we really now need to start thinking about putting in place permanent air defences fixed in strategically important positions so that should the worst happen, we're completely prepared?
Oh, I think we absolutely must now put in some land-based air defences because, if you think about defence reviews 15 years ago, we could look at who had ballistic missiles and make a reasonable assessment that they weren't going to attack us with them. Now, more and more different groups have got hold of these technologies and are continuing to develop them. And in another 10 or 15 years, the threat will be even more intense and more widespread. And if we don't do something about it now while we've got the chance, we could live to regret it. So we can't just rely on America. We must cooperate with our European neighbours to try and ensure that the whole of the European space is safe. And the truth is, we are getting one or two fingers pointing at us from abroad because we're not really doing enough to pull our weight.
Thing is, though, I mean, it does all cost money. Money is in short supply at the moment. Anyone who attacked the UK with a ballistic missile, it would be seen as an act of war. We are a member of NATO. Isn't that deterrent enough?
No, I don't believe it is, because, as I've mentioned, some of these groups that are in the process of getting hold of these technologies will be quite difficult to declare war on, because you won't know quite how to go about prosecuting that. So I agree with you that money is very tight. And although it's said that we currently spend 2.3% of our money on defence, if you net out of that the nuclear deterrent, which gobbles up a huge proportion of it, we're only actually spending about 1.6% of our GDP on the conventional defence budget, and this is simply not enough. So, I mean, people say, oh, Donald Trump is out to wreck NATO, but actually, Donald Trump and everyone in America, Joe Biden included, have a point when they say that Europe has, as a whole, not done enough on its own account in the defence sphere and has been too willing to just assume that Uncle Sam will bail us out if there's trouble. But we can see in Ukraine that the threat is becoming increasingly close and real, and we need to do something about it urgently. So I sympathise with the government. They've had an awful inheritance. They've got huge demands across the piece on public money. But above all else, the government's first responsibility is the security of the people. And this is something where, in this particular aspect that you're pinpointing today, I think we're badly lacking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain element of enlightened self-interest about investing in our own defences rather than contracting it out to the American taxpayer. I wonder if we could have a quick word about this news that broke just a couple of hours ago, a fresh offensive being launched by Ukraine in Russia's Kursk region. Now, of course, this is seemingly intractable, but we've got Donald Trump coming in as president promising that he's going to end this dispute. The instability on Europe's borders is a considerable worry. What's your assessment of what is going on in Ukraine right now and how you think it might play out across the course of this year?
Well, it's been not exactly a stalemate, but a fairly slow, grinding war for some time now, taking awful casualty rates on both sides. There's no doubt that Russia has been advancing in eastern Ukraine, albeit slowly. And I think, in a sense, this is quite an adventurous ploy on Ukraine's part to make an attack in Russia to, I think, try and bring home to the Russian people the reality of what the war is actually all about. But I can't see a resolution coming to this anytime soon. I can imagine Donald Trump, in a sense, almost trying to go over the head of Ukraine and Zelensky and try and make some sort of deal with Putin. But I just don't see quite what that deal could possibly be. Putin has invaded. Can we trust him to stop? I mean, the suggestion is maybe Trump will tell him to stop at the line that he's reached so far, and then Trump won't give any more support to Ukraine, but I can't see Putin going for that. He's winning, albeit not very overwhelmingly, and he's still advancing, albeit not very fast, and I think he'll want to keep going. So Trump may think he's going to be able to resolve this anytime soon, but I'm not too sure he is. I mean, in the end, I suppose it's true to say that any resolution is likely to end up with some territory having to be ceded permanently to Russia, but I don't think it's remotely acceptable that the rest of Ukraine can then be forbidden from joining the EU and NATO. I think the price Putin will have to pay is that his border with NATO then runs right up to that line. Otherwise, how can anyone trust him to stop there? Not only the Ukrainians, but the Baltic states, Poland, Moldova. No one's going to trust him unless the line is drawn and then defended seriously.
Well, indeed. Sir Nick Harvey, thank you for your time this afternoon. Liberal Democrat Armed Forces Minister in the coalition government, talking there about Britain's defence spending and the situation in Ukraine.